Sorry, just going to get you guys to stop having fun, listen to a few words. My name is Julie Nagam. I am the chair of the History of Indigenous Arts in North America. It is a joint position here at the Winnipeg Art Gallery and the University of Winnipeg. And it's my great pleasure, I hear some chuckles back there, so it's hard to concentrate. It's my great pleasure to welcome us to this amazing place, which we call Winnipeg. You are literally in the heart of the continent. You are where the two rivers meet, and you are on Treaty 1 territory and the heartland of the Métis. Woo! So that part's exciting, and it's always a pleasure to get to welcome you guys here, and I'm so excited that we're going to kick off the Initiative for Indigenous Futures. And to start that, we're going to have a screening of Skawennati's work, Time Traveler TM. This is an amazing feat. It's one of the most kind of innovative, critical works of thinking through digital and new media. I'm excited for you guys to all see it. As soon as we see the screening, we're going to pull the screen up, and myself, artist Benesiinaabandan, artist and IIF director Jason Lewis, and Skawennati, the artist herself, will get to have a little bit of a dialogue and some conversation. We're going to start with some questions, and then we'll open it up for some questions for everybody else. So without further ado, let's watch Time Traveler, TM. Okay, so it's my pleasure to invite some of my some excellent guests that we've invited here at the Winnipeg Art Gallery. And sorry to make sure that you guys watched all the credits. One of the very first lessons that I ever learned from Métis filmmaker Christine Welsh was you sit through every single credit so you know how many people were involved in the creation of the work. So without further ado, I saw Jason and Scott's name in there multiple times. So I want to introduce Skawennati, the producer of Time Traveler TM. She makes art that addresses history. Yeah, that's good. Skawennati makes art that addresses history, the future, and change. Her pioneering new media projects include the online gallery chat space and mixed reality event Cyber Powwow, 1997 to 2004, paper doll time travel journal, Imagining Indians in the 25th Century in 2001, and Time Traveler TM, which we just got to witness. Her work has been shown nationally and internationally at large-scale biennales in all different parts of Canada and also internationally. She has been honored to win the Imaginative's 2009 Best New Media Award, as well as in 2011, she won the Eiteljorg Contemporary Art Fellowship. Her work is included in both public and private collections. She was born in Ganawage, Mohawk Territory. She holds a BFA from Concordia University in Montreal, where she is based. She is the co-director with Jason Edward Lewis of Aboriginal Territories in Cyberspace, or AbTeC, a research network of artists, academics, and technologists investigating, creating, and critiquing Indigenous virtual environments. She also co-directs the workshops in Aboriginal story and digital media skins, and Skawennati is the partnership coordinator for the Initiative for Indigenous Futures. Please welcome Skawennati. Next up on our roster is Jason Edward Lewis. He is a digital media poet, artist, software designer, developing research creation projects that explore computation as creative and cultural material. Lewis's work has been featured at Ars Electronica, a word I cannot pronounce, and among other venues. He has been recognized with the inaugural Robert Coover Award for Best Work in Electronic Literature, Prix Access Electronica Honorable Mention, several Imaginative New Medias Awards, and 5 solo exhibitions. He writes about mobile media, video game design, machinima, and experimental pedagogy with Indigenous communities. Lewis is currently a Trudeau Fellow, which is a huge honor. He is the research chair in computational media and Indigenous future imaginary, as well as a professor of computational arts at Concordia University. Born and raised in Northern California, he currently lives in Montreal with his partner, and he is Cherokee, Hawaiian, and Samoan. Come on up. I'd also like to invite one of our current artists in the exhibition that Jamie, Isaac, and myself curated, Insurgence Resurgence. He is one of our commissioned artists for the exhibition, and it's a real pleasure to get to have him back. Scott Benesiinaabandan is an Anishinaabe intermedia artist that works primarily in photography, video, audio, and printmaking. Scott completed an international residencies in Australia, in Ireland, in Lethbridge, along with international collaborative projects in both the UK and Ireland. Scott is currently based in Montreal, where he's completing a year-long Canada Council New Media Production Grant through OBX Labs and AbTeC and the Initiative for Indigenous Futures. Scott is currently investigating a virtual reality as a medium and has recently completed an NFB Ford Foundation intensive residency around VR. Scott's new VR work, which is part of 2167, will also be showcased here on Saturday for the Video Arcade Day, which is Saturday at 11 a.m. to 2 p.m. In the past years, Benesiinaabandan has been awarded multiple grants from Canada Council of the Arts, Manitoba Arts Council, Winnipeg Arts Council, and a council in Quebec. His work can be found in a number of provincial and national collections. Sorry, I'm not going to do the French. It just, especially because I know Scott's going to tease me later. So anyways, come on up, Scott. It's so bright. Okay.
Yeah, it's like the
I know, it's like the hot seat. Yeah, we know that there's friendly faces out there. So I thought how we would start is I had a few questions that I was going to ask the panelists, and we could each, you guys could each take a turn kind of taking it up. And then I hope that we could open up some opportunity for other people to ask some questions, specifically about Time Traveler TM, because we just got to watch it. So I kind of wanted to start with an easier question, or at least you guys are all practicing artists, and I thought maybe you want to talk a little bit about your art practice. So.
I like it.
Or your artistic process.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, thanks. That helps. I guess I've been thinking about Indigenous people in the future and wanting to just visualize us there, because I felt there was a major lack of Native people in that sort of sci-fi future. Whenever we watch Star Trek or read Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, there's no Native people there, no Indigenous people. So that sort of was how it began, and yet I found that when I started doing that, I kept having to look backwards and look at our past. And so that's what my practice has been for kind of a long time right now. I try to do a lot of research. I don't, watching this show, I remember how much research I did, and I had a lot of help too, like you said. Like Alcatraz, for example, I went to San Francisco, I went to Alcatraz Island, I went to the archive there, I talked to people. And I find that I want to say that I don't consider myself a historian, but so that's why I get to play also, and play a little bit with the history and imagine what maybe some of the things might have been like. Imagine it from my, perspective as an Indigenous woman living in this time. I've been working with machinima, which is what you saw there. For those of you who don't know, it was kind of described in the movie. It's not an animation. I did not have control over every movement of the characters. It's kind of basically a game, Second Life. And so the reason I chose machinima, though, is because Second Life to me felt like this really futuristic medium. I really thought, and I still kind of do think, that in the future, we will connect with one another through these virtual worlds. because you never have a bad hair day.
I like this place.
It seems like to me, it seems like the natural evolution of FaceTime and Google Hangout. But because it seems so fun. I mean, it is so much fun for me. But my first love actually was beadwork and textiles and sewing. I mean, that's what I learned as a little girl. And I've been feeling the pull of that coming back, and so I think maybe not right tomorrow, but it's sort of going to sneak its way back into my work. And so I made this piece called Dancing with Myself, which was actually a photograph of myself next to what I now call a machinimograph, because it's a picture taken inside of a virtual world. So it's my avatar and myself dressed exactly alike. And so I had made this ribbon shirt for my avatar before I made myself one. So then I made this one in real life with like real fabric and thread, and put on this costume. And I was like, this is fun. So I don't know, maybe it'll, maybe in that direction. I also made another piece more recently called Generations of Play, which has my avatar wearing that same outfit that is like sort of my superhero costume, and a Barbie doll and a cornhusk doll, all wearing that same outfit. And I made the little outfit for the Barbie. It was also very fun.
Well, you can see those details throughout all of the episodes. So although it's you might not have hand stitched each piece, but you can see even from the distinctive pattern of spots in Hunter's house or to another time place where they go, you can see those little details that, even the little crisscross patterns on the second episode on their moccasins, right? So I think that is coming through that kind of practice. It's just a different medium of how it's getting translated.
Yeah. I'm really happy to hear that, because, I was looking at, sometimes I was watching this, I haven't, watched it fully like this in a little while, and, thinking about all the time we spent making some of the things that we made, and thinking, God, they're on the screen for such a short time. But yeah, that's a kind of nutshell view of what I'm working on. I've made a couple more machinimas that was in this year, 2017. So I did one called She Falls for Ages, which is it's a sci-fi retelling, a sci-fi feminist retelling of the Haudenosaunee creation story, so the Sky Woman story. And then I did a sci-fi retelling of the Haudenosaunee Confederation story. So that's the peacemaker bringing the 5 Iroquois nations together. So those are out and about now.
That's awesome.
Yeah. That's it for me for the moment.
My primary practice is actually built around poetry and writing and text, and combining that with computation. Kind of formally, I'm very interested in how we can think about computation as a material practice. So talking in some of those terms as well, as thinking about what is it about particular programming languages or particular pieces of hardware, particular computational architectures that allow us to do some things easier than other things. And in the last ever since we sort of started Aboriginal Territories in Cyberspace, also thinking about it in terms of computation as a cultural material. So what sort of culture is being expressed through computation as it's sort of grown to this point, but sort of more importantly, how can we as Cherokees, as Mohawks, as Anishinaabe, as Indigenous people, how can we sort of take that material and make it our own in a particular way? So what does it mean to think about these materials in the service of our particular worldviews? Because the lineage of that sort of material comes from a very different kind of worldview. But I also think it's very powerful, and it's a very interesting creative space to work in. So I want to figure out how we can make it work for us. My last big project was called Poetry for Excitable Mobile Media, and it was a series of 8 interactive poetry pieces made for touchscreen. So originally for large scale, like 50-inch touchscreens for gallery exhibition, but then we moved them onto iPhones and iPads as well. There's a very brief glimpse of one of them in the last episode of Time Traveler. Is the big blue piece up in the wall in the dining room with the things look like fish swimming through it. It's called The Great Migration. And I'm not sure what my next project is. I've sort of taken a bit of a pause on my practice to help get this initiative for Indigenous Futures off the ground, but probably doing something with virtual environments.
First of all, thank you for having us here, Julie. It's super awesome. Thank you. And I'd like to pay respects to the Anishinaabe and Cree people of our territory. So glad I get to do that.
Thank you.
Welcome, Mohawks. So I'm super happy to be. I'm super happy to be here right now. But I grew up in Winnipeg, and I'm really happy to be here. So, I mean, I guess thinking about where the future sort of technology and where my practice lies is I think the piece upstairs at Amikika 1097 and the piece that I produced with Initiative for Indigenous Futures and OPX Labs, Blueberry Pine to the Martian Sky, really really got back to my roots in Winnipeg. And so I grew up here, and a big part of the learning process in Winnipeg was learning and listening to Anishinaabe and the role that has in the language has in our future. So I think now it's really becoming clear to me what the language, the possibilities of language have us to carry us into the future. And so I think both those pieces really sort of speak to the possibilities for the language. And so I think for my artistic practice, it's always going to incorporate some element of the language and sort of where that fits in. And so, yeah.
Okay.
Good.
So one of the questions that I know that, especially with the organization of the symposium, is what's the attraction to digital media? And so I was gonna ask you that question, but make it more broad in a way that how do you see digital media as integral part of your artistic kind of practice, or do you see it as a tool, or how do you actually envision its position in your work?
Mm-hmm. Thanks for having me. Wah, wah, wah. So no, I don't see it as integral to my work, actually. I definitely see it as a tool. I'm very seduced by digital culture, or I mean, that's what I remember when I went to university. My supply list was repeatographs. I was in design art, white paint to erase the ink lines that you would make. It was these things. And halfway through my design, my degree, we had this course offered to us, the computer as a design tool. And I fell in love. I was seduced. That's how I think of it. It was, I don't know exactly what it was. I mean, it just seemed kind of magical. And also, there was this talk of how this information society was going to change the world, right? It was very utopian at the time, and I bought it hook, line, and sinker. I really thought that being together in virtual worlds and connecting digitally was going to, and information being free, was going to emancipate us all, Mm-hmm. And of course, that's not what happened, right? Capitalism found its, and that's what everyone was saying to me all along, too. They were like, they got to find a way to make it pay for itself. It can't all be free, So, now, that's the other side of what I was just saying, now that, I don't know if this is a big downer on this table, but I'm just sort of, I'm not as, finally 20 years later, the bloom has worn off. I'm not quite as enamored with the digital as I was. I mean, I don't get me wrong, it is still fun, I just finished making that latest machinima. It was totally fun, but you're also wrestling with the technology. You're always running to keep up with it because it's changing on you, or it's glitching out on you, in my case, I was worried at one point, actually during Time Traveler TM, filming it, that Second Life was going to go bankrupt. So what was I going to do, you know? So there's like, you know, you can't be too worried about, I mean, I guess, you know, yeah. So I'll stop here.
Well, it's absolutely central to my practice. But I actually came to it also in university because I saw it as a writing practice. So similar thing, sort of had to take a range of different classes, and one of the classes we had to take was programming class, and I sort of went into it and sort of kind of got there the first day and started seeing what we were going to learn, and realized that programming is a writing practice in the same way that poetry is a writing practice. In fact, they're very similar in a couple interesting ways. One of the most important ones being that they're writing practices that require really, really, really close attention to the fine details of language in different ways, but sort of a kind of eye-wateringly sort of precise use and construction of language. And so that's where I kind of fell in love with the digital at that point, is thinking about it as an extension or sort of a kind of another parallel stream of my writing practice. And then it took probably 7 or 8 years for me to actually kind of bring them together into works where I was sort of programming and writing at the same time. So I think I fell out of love with it probably 10 years ago or something like that. I like it a lot. But I worked in Silicon Valley for about 15 years, and being in Silicon Valley and being kind of in the belly of that particular beast, you know, sort of showed me lots of the different kind of problems that came along with that particular kind of way of looking at the world, and that particular kind of false sort of promise of emancipation and freedom and all those sorts of things. Because you could sort of just look around. I could just look around the research labs that I was working in and realizing that it was pretty much just the same old people doing the stuff that they've always done, all the white guys. But like I said, I like it a lot, and I feel I'm very comfortable with it, and I'm happy to work with it. I think sort of kind of computationally as much as I think, and it's sort of poetically. So for me, when I can actually kind of bring those two things together, I'm very, very happy. That's sort of where I know I'm doing something right, but it's still really hard. So it's still a struggle, and there's still times when I decide just to write poetry and not worry about the digital component. And part of it is because it's appropriate to the particular piece I have in my head, but part of it also is sometimes just a very practical, you know, do I want to kind of engage this whole apparatus in order to express myself in this particular moment? And sometimes I just decide not to. And then frankly, sometimes I'm able to say yes because we have wonderful research assistants who work with us at Concordia, and they're better programmers than I am now. So I can work with them to make the work that I sort of envision in my head.
As far as digital media from my practice, I think I'm still in love with it, and it's primarily for the fact that it's so portable. I mean, it's the democracy of putting your whole art onto a USB and mailing it off or Dropboxing it and sharing it with that. Like even what you'll like for Blueberry Pie in the Martian Sky, I can throw that piece into my backpack and show it to anybody, anywhere, and it's very portable and very democratic, you know. And I think that's a huge problem with me in terms of art that's installed in big institutions and the four white walls of galleries. And I think that digital media answered some of that problem for me. And I think that for me, that's always gonna, like, I mean, I still love building things and having things installed, but I also think that being able to just like send a video file or a digital file or a VR file to somebody and have them experience the piece exactly how I want them to experience, I think that's very powerful and will carry me forward.
So the next question I was going to ask was, in much of your practice, you all look at narratives of Indigenous knowledge. And so whether that's taking up different mediums like photography or sound or poetry or machinima, you kind of weave a story or a narrative through the work. And I mean, that's very prevalent in Time Traveler, especially because we just watched it, but also because it's a longer series, so you have the ability to do that. But that work, those sort of narratives also ring true in the kind of poetic work that you do, Jason, and then also some of the photography and sound-based work that Scott does. So I don't know if you guys want to think that through.
How about Scott goes first this time?
Can you just quickly recap that question?
Sure.
I was expecting her to answer. It's like, I'll catch it up.
It's going out. He's like,
Digital,
I went first
digital. Just
two
send
times
me
already.
USB that too.
Basically, I'm just saying, or I'm asking you guys, you work with ideas of Indigenous knowledge, and you guys weave it through your work, and you create a narrative in different ways. So is that a conscious decision? Is that something that, becomes an unconscious decision that just ends up working its way into the work?
Well, I think it's both. I think that if you're immersed in that worldview, it's going to come out in your work, right? Like there's no conscious effort to purposely incorporate those stories or those narratives into the work. But if you're surrounded by that world, then that world will reflect in your work, So I think even the piece that's upstairs is a reflection of the world that I live in, and the stories that I hear and the people that I interact with. So, there's no conscious effort, but I think it's just like a natural. We reflect who we are as artists, right? The world we live in.
So yeah, I think for me, it's for most of my practice, it's been fairly background. It's there, but I didn't, for a long time, I didn't necessarily sort of address those things head on and sort of explicitly in the work. That changed with the last 3 or 4 pieces in the Poetry and Excitable Mobile Media project, where sort of engaging some of these issues, around my own identity and sort of where I situate myself. I'm adopted out. I was raised in Northern California by a white family. It's sort of a complicated story. So sort of using those works to kind of help me start to figure those things out and figure out where I get positioned. And I actually think that another reason why it's been a good moment at this moment to kind of pause on my practice is I think that there's a lot of kind of thinking in my head that's going on that I'm still trying to figure out, that comes about from the work that we've been doing and spending more time in Hawaii for myself. And so there's things going on in my head that I haven't really figured out where they're gonna go, like how I'm gonna express them, whether I'm gonna return to things like the Poetry for Excitable Media stuff, or go back to straight up poetry, or try something differently. But sort of over time, they're becoming more and more, I think, sort of explicit in what I wanna express.
For myself, it's been extremely conscious that I'm doing that. Like, I was thinking about the Oka episode, and there were hundreds and hundreds of newspaper articles and texts and things written about that, and yet I still saw so little that was from the Mohawk perspective. And so I really felt like that was something I could do. Like, not that I'm saying I represent all Mohawks or Indigenous people, you know that, but just sometimes still feel like you gotta say it. But I really just wanted to delve in to some of the things that I knew and some of the things I thought I should know, like the creation story. Like, I had always heard all these bits of it, but I never went and searched it out as the full thing until I did this piece, until I did She Falls for Ages, and then I really immersed myself in it, but it wasn't with me. It wasn't like it was already in there, as part of what I grew up with. I heard Sky Woman, I heard The Turtle, I heard lots of things, but I never had that complete narrative in my head. And then, I just felt like there weren't enough voices, Indigenous voices, making that kind of work. But now I'm feeling differently. I feel like there's a lot more of us, and I feel like maybe I can, not that I would like to think about some other things, but from an Indigenous perspective, or at least from my perspective as an Indigenous woman, cloning. What do I think about that? What do we think about that? I think it'd be really, well, I will find it interesting to think about AI, for example, which I've actually already decided I'm not that interested in. But like, you know, some of these technologies and these ideas, you know, that are coming at us, and, you know, like, I think we need to think about these things as Indigenous people. Like, what is our response to that? So that's where I'm kind of thinking of heading.
And especially as a parent with children, of like what the future holds in that kind of format, right?
Mm-hmm.
And if that voice is present or not present, it's important.
Well, I think in terms of those ideas, in terms of thinking about the future, where these things go, I think that, you know, Indigenous sort of ways of thinking about relationships, for instance, and sort of responsibility and things like that are actually could be incredibly important contributions to that wider conversation of what's happening with things like artificial intelligence and robotics and clones and things like that, because there's a real kind of weakness in kind of the mainstream conversation in terms of how to deal with these new entities that we're creating, and I think that there's, you know, looking at worldviews that are espoused by our different peoples, there's a rich vocabulary and way of looking at things that could be of use, and I think will be of use in that conversation. The question is whether the larger conversation will pay attention or not.
So I noticed when I asked a question about your guys' practice, one of the things that was prevalent, and again, especially in Time Traveler, is I wanted to ask, how important is community in your practice as artists and as practitioners? How do you engage or not engage? You know, how does it influence or not influence your work?
Yeah, I'll go first again.
I'm gonna jump on that one.
Taking one for the team.
It's quite important. So, you know, community is something that's very, right? We all probably have multiple communities that we operate in. You know, we've got the family and extended family. I've got like my Indigenous artist community that's spread out across Turtle Island. You know, I've got Ganawage, which is like I'm in and I'm out at the same time for a number of reasons. But you know, I definitely feel like, what I feel like is that when I make something, I think, what is my mother gonna say about this? And then I think, what's my family gonna say? What's Jason gonna say? What's my Indigenous art people gonna say? What's that community gonna say? You know, and so the community of Ganawage. And I really, you know, and I have special people in my life, like Oizogo Lahash, who might be here. Hi. Like Kathleen, Kathleen Deerhouse, who's supposed to be watching right now on the live stream. You know, and other people as well, very knowledgeable in our traditions and our history. And, you know, I've decided, like, I'm not asking them for permission, but I say that, you know, it's a conversation, and I say, okay, this is what I want to do. Will it be offensive? You know, how offensive? You know, if yes, how offensive?
On a level.
You know, and how far am I willing to go? How far am I willing to go in doing that? You know, so, for example, you know, I wanted to depict Sky Woman as an alien, which I did do, but Oizogo was like, some people might not be that happy about that. And so, you know, it factored into my decision to keep her humanoid, which, so she looks great, like, you know, you're gonna love her. But, you know, so I'm, you know, also, you know, watching Time Traveler TM again, you know, hearing, you know, one of the decisions I made, well, at first it was not a decision, it was just like I didn't have the money, so I was never gonna hire an actor. I had, you know, but I wanted to find people who were either Mohawk or Indigenous, you know, and especially for the Oka one, I really wanted, like, Mohawk people.
I could hear the voices. You used lots of the, like, I could actually was having flashbacks to all of the media and, you know, all of the stuff that I've taught, and remember seeing it because the voices were so accurate. Well, it was almost
actually,
eerie.
Ellen Gabriel's voice was her voice from that news clip. The newscaster, Brian Mulroney, they were all like the actual news clip. I just stole it from the internet and put it in there. Yeah. Well, I asked Ellen.
Yeah, I was gonna say, asked Ellen.
See, I didn't. I care about Ellen thinks.
Yeah.
I don't care what Peter Mansfield or Bridge.
Yeah.
You know. Sorry, Peter.
Mansfield. Peter Mansplainer.
Peter Mans.
Yeah. So it's,
That's a good one.
yeah. So yeah, and then like later, I chose, when I maybe could have paid a real actor, I chose to use someone, for example, who speaks Ganyangeha. You know, so she's not an actress, but like she could say the words so perfectly. You know, even though it wasn't all in Ganyangeha, but there would be a name or a reference. And so I like that in the work. Sometimes I cringe, I have to admit, like at certain word or something, a turn of phrase that's like, no matter how many times I directed them to do it in the way I wanted it, like it just came out the way they did it, cause, you know, and because they don't, I don't know why, because they don't care how I direct them. They're not an actor or whatever, you know. But like, it's so worth it, you know. It's worth it to have that person working with me. Like also, that's the other thing is too, you know, working with community members on some of these projects, they've given so much to the project, you know, through not just through their voices, but like saying, oh, I think that, you know, like, you know, Tina Stacy said, I really think I would say, Utko, is he ever handsome? You know? And I was like, oh yeah, please do that, you know. Yeah.
And then she smiles. She's like, that's right. Super handsome. He doesn't get those
Community. So it's funny. I think that for the most part, I've thought about my art practice. It's sort of like kind of this kind of sort of concentric circle of sort of like the digital poetry, electronic literature world, which is kind of inflected as well with a kind of interactive media world, and then sort of the Indigenous arts world, particularly up here, up north, and sort of figuring out, sort of thinking about the work always in terms of when you're thinking about, you know, who are the voices in your head, you know, sort of, you know, once you get beyond the family and you know, sort of what is the larger community for that. But I still think of it largely as kind of a singular practice, like not as a community practice. Where the community practice comes in is in terms of the production work. So the work that we do in terms of supporting other artists in Aboriginal territories in cyberspace, and the Initiative for Indigenous Futures, and working with youth from Ganawagi in Hawaii and other places, and really thinking in terms of how to build capacity within the larger community so that there's more people who are comfortable working with these technologies. And that's something that's kind of central to sort of my, I think, creative output. Like in terms of, I get a lot of the same pleasure out of doing that work as I get out of actually making my own work myself. So.
Yeah, I think community has been kind of foundational for my practice. Growing up in Winnipeg and the Indigenous community here sort of taught me how to interact in community and how to build community. And I think that it served me really well in my arts practice. Like, I mean, I've been Australia, like the UK, Scotland, like everywhere I go, those sort of basic lessons of how to be in community and that respect and that sort of foundational sort of what is community and where are you within that is sort of been an element that is all over the world, right? Like each community is always gonna, like, if you can go in there with respect and listen more than you talk, then you're always gonna be welcome into that community. So I think that whether that's here in Anishinaabe territory or, you know, in Mohawk territory or in like Australian communities, I think like it's the same sort of foundation. So I think that, and I don't believe that any of my art could ever happen without is a singular entity. I think that it takes a whole, like even the work that I do with Blueberry Pie, meeting Jason and Skawennati and being out in Montreal and sort of Mohawk territory in that community sort of is reflective in terms that the idea of community. So I think, yeah, it's very important and it will always be so.
Awesome. So I'd like to open it up to anybody else that would like to ask a question. I think that there are 2 mics at either side. Sorry, it's so hard to see you guys. Oh, thanks, Evan. There's a mic on the right and a mic on the left. If anybody would like to ask any of our fantastic panelists a question.
Okay.
Yeah, you had some good questions.
Hey, I tried. Oh, maybe. All right.
Thanks,
That a
Cheryl.
girl, Cheryl. That a girl.
Well, I've known you for a long time, Skawennati, and one of the things I thought was really interesting in the last episode of Time Traveler, because I remember you said you weren't going to make any more, and then you made this one, or maybe you made it and then you said you weren't going to make any more. But the thing that I really was interested in, I'm sitting with Kathy Mattis, and she's calling out all the names of the artists who's in that, and it reminded me of Cyber Powwow. And I thought this is really interesting. So maybe I just want you to comment on that notion of when you go back to older things that you've done and you sort of pull them out and realize that there was parts of it that you didn't work on, deal with, and now you have this opportunity or this platform. And maybe that's for everybody on the panel, if there's that notion in using digital domain to kind of, take some things, give them another go.
Cool. So Cyber Powwow, for those of you who are not born yet, was kind of a, I think of it as the ancestor of Second Life. It was a 2D virtual world, a graphical chat space. That's when I first learned the term avatar. The default avatar in Cyber Powwow was a happy face. Like a little, yeah. And your words came out in balloons. It was so cool. I loved it. So I guess I started this project that also created a huge community, I suppose, or I drew on my community members to include people to basically create an Indigenous cyberspace. That's what Cyber Powwow was in a nutshell. There's I've done hour-long presentations on it, so I won't do that to you now. But you can go look online at cyberpowwow.net. It's still there. And yeah, for sure, when I got into Second Life, I was like, dude, oh my God, now we can really do this right, But I think the same thing's happening with with the Second Life as what happened with the Palace is people are not that interested in downloading the client. Weirdly enough, now we're downloading apps all the time, but I'm not sure what it is. I still haven't given up. I'm very hard-headed. So I have started something in September, actually a year ago September. Has it? Yeah, we did it for 1 year, called Activating AbTeC Island. So AbTeC Island is the piece of virtual land that us real Indians spend real money on every year. It's what I use to build the sets for the machinimas. We've also actually had classes in it with the Ute. And what else have we done? We've had meetings in there. And so this Activating AbTeC Island is like every Friday we make sure that there's people on our island hanging out as avatars to receive visitors. So we're waiting for you all to come visit us in Second Life on our island. Come hang out and, we'll give tours, we'll show you how to build, we'll take you around that art gallery that's in there with all those 21st century Indigenous artists.
Yeah, I like that part for sure. Also, too, it was neat to see Hannah's piece because, right now there's a concert going on in the Eckhart Hall, but Hannah Claus's piece is hanging in Eckhart Hall, and it almost looks like it was built for that space. It just looks stunning. So when I was watching it on the Time Traveler TM, I was just thinking in my head, I was like, the only difference was she actually kind of walked through it where our ceilings are just too high. Yeah, so you have to kind of look up.
Well, I was just going to say, I think that the kind of the Cyber Powwow Second Life evolution points out one of the things that is actually really cool about technology in the sense that you can sort of think a dream of something about doing in say 1996 and do a version of it, right? And then sort of like 10, 12 years later, the technology gets to the point that you can kind of really do it in the way that you want, right? And so that's happened to me with some of the technology that I use. It's certainly happening with virtual reality right now. So that's a really fun space to play in the sense of like the material, it's very frustrating the material is moving so fast because you have to keep up. But it's also kind of exciting, I think, if you can kind of like check out for a while and then come back 5 years later and see where it's at, right? Instead of trying to keep up every year, and then sort of see the new magical things you can do with the latest iteration.
Not much to add to that. I mean, I was a little bit, wasn't part of the but you know what? I'm part of the continuum
You
now.
won't download Second Life either.
But I mean, the work we're doing now is a continuum of the
Yeah.
exact same thing. So I think that is, even though I wasn't part of CyberPower, like I'm part of the VR work that we're doing now. So I think it's this kind of wonderful continuum, and the same conversations that we had with CyberPower we're having with VR. So.
Yeah.
Anybody else would like to ask a question?
Hello. Oh, wow. Sorry. Okay, so looking at your works up right now at Concordia and looking at, say, Aboriginal territories in cyberspace and AbTeC Island, what does it mean for you about land and reclaiming space and territory? Like, could you talk maybe a bit more about how you can kind of incorporate that into, say, Indigenous perspectives? I don't know, or from Indigenous perspective.
I'll let you go, Miss Aboriginally Determined Cyberspace, Territories Cyberspace.
Yeah, that's my term. I don't even know where to start. Well, I'll start with what I said to you already today, Adrian, that I think that every human has a connection to the land. That, yeah. And that no matter where you put me, I am still Indigenous, I am still Ganyangahaga. So if you put me in Italy, I'm still Mohawk. It doesn't matter where you put me. If you put me in cyberspace, I'm still Mohawk. And so that is how I've gone at it all this time. Like how can we, this was, I guess, I'm not sure if what we were doing was indigenization, but that's maybe the word, that might be a word for what we were doing. We were making sure that there were Indigenous spaces in cyberspace. Now, how does it relate to the land? I'm not sure how it relates. I think that claiming we've talked about claiming territory in cyberspace for a while. We've talked about that, and I think that cyberspace was looked upon, and maybe still is, as a this open space, much like the New World was, much like Turtle Island was to the Europeans, and so I think the fact that we Indigenous artists and people were kind of also, I really don't want to use the word colonizing, but we're also visiting, checking out, and building in cyberspace at the same time as the as white people were, was really political. I mean, I really think that it was us taking up the space that we needed to take up, and so I can imagine it and I have imagined it as a parallel to what we need to do in the real world, on the dirt, on the land, on the territory that we occupy in our real bodies.
You can't mess with that one, eh? Okay, on that note, I want to say Chimigwich to all of you for coming, and this is just the beginning. So it's only going to get more exciting and more fun. I just want to make note that tomorrow there's a Métis Kitchen Table Talk with Kathy Mattis, Jenny Western, Jamie Isaac, myself, and Heather Gugliorte at the University of Winnipeg at 4:30 to 6. The room I do not know because I'm not that smart, but I can definitely, we'll post it. It's on the University of Winnipeg website, and I'm sure some nice person will help you if you come over to the university. What is it? Oh, 1L08. Thanks, Kathy.
Oh.
That's impressive. Thursday, we're here for the symposium during the day, where we'll have Indigenous artists, curators, designers, scholars, practitioners from Canada, the United States, Australia, New Zealand, and Norway, speaking on different aspects and exciting topics. Thursday night from 7 o'clock to 11 p.m., we are going to have a variety of activating performance, and so we're going to have a whole host of performance from hoop dancing to the light teepee to DJing to singing, also some nice fiddle. So please come and join us. And Friday we will do the symposium during the day, and there's a launch of a Maori exhibition curated by Ruben Friend, who's one of our guests from New Zealand at Urban Shaman. And Saturday, we are going to have the Indigenous video game and VR arcade. So please come and see us. Thanks so much for everybody's time and energy, and thanks again to our panelists.
Thank you.